I remember the day so clearly. It wasn't marked by shouting or a fight, not at all. It was quiet, almost invisible, but that's exactly what hurt the most. I had spent years building our home, raising our children, giving every piece of myself to our family, and yet, I felt like a shadow in my own life. That morning, I was in the kitchen, washing dishes after breakfast. The sunlight streamed softly through the curtains, and the house smelled like coffee and toast. My husband came in, smiling, talking about his day ahead, and I smiled back. But then he said something that stopped me cold. "I don't know why you bother so much. It's just food and cleaning." I froze, soap slipping from my hands. I blinked, unsure if I had heard him right. But he didn't notice. He didn't pause. He walked away humming, leaving me standing there, holding dishes that suddenly felt heavy, heavy with all the love, effort, and care that no one seemed to see. I sat down at the table, trying to breathe. I wanted to cry, to tell him how much I had done for this family silently, but the words wouldn't come. They had been there before, spoken in small bursts. "You're tired, let me handle it, I'll take care of it later." But later never came. Recognition never came. Appreciation never came. It was in that moment, standing alone in the kitchen, that I realized I didn't exist to him. Not really. I had been his partner. Yes. I had loved him. Yes. I had built a life with him. Yes. But in his eyes, the sacrifices I made, the nights I stayed up worrying about bills, the mornings I woke early to prepare breakfast, the countless times I put my dreams aside for his, it was invisible. And I remember thinking, is this how it always will be? Will he never see me? Will I always be unseen in my own home? That feeling of invisibility, of being unnoticed by the man I had trusted most, was sharp and quiet all at once. It didn't explode into an argument. It crept in, wrapping around me like a cold sheet. And in that silence, I made a decision not yet spoken, not yet acted upon, but a decision to understand why I had given so much, and yet felt so empty. I didn't know then how this day would change everything, or how a single comment could open years of unspoken pain. But I felt it deep in my chest, that quiet ache, and I knew nothing would ever be the same again. Our family had always seemed ordinary from the outside. People would see us laughing around the dinner table, watching our kids play in the yard, or leaving for work hand in hand, and they would think everything was perfect. And maybe, to them, it was, but life inside our home had its quiet corners, its small struggles, and moments no one ever noticed. I had married him straight out of college. He was kind, funny, and ambitious. I was young and hopeful, dreaming of building a family and a home that felt safe and warm. In those early years, everything felt like a partnership. We shared chores, decisions, and plans. We celebrated every small victory together. But slowly, as the years went on, I began to feel my presence shrinking in his life. Our children came one after another. Each brought joy and new responsibilities. I woke up before sunrise to prepare breakfasts, packed lunches, and ironed clothes. I stayed up late helping with homework, nursing colds, and worrying about school projects, exams, and friendships. I handled bills, groceries, and the endless small errands that made a home function smoothly. And through it all, I did it quietly. I didn't want praise. I didn't want arguments. I only wanted our home to be a place of love and comfort. He worked long hours, often coming home tired, yet he expected dinner to be ready, the house to be clean, and the children to be in bed on time. And I did it, every day, without complaint. Sometimes, I would catch him glancing at me with a brief smile or a nod, but those moments were fleeting, almost accidental. Most of the time, he simply assumed I was handling everything, as if it were second nature, as if I had no needs, no fatigue, no dreams of my own. Friends would invite us to gatherings, and I would laugh and smile, hiding the exhaustion behind my eyes. "She's always so calm," they would say, and I would nod, forcing a smile, because I didn't want anyone to know how invisible I was beginning to feel in my own life. Even our conversations became short, transactional. Did you pay the bill? Did the kids finish homework? Is dinner ready? I was there, but I was no longer fully seen. My thoughts, my worries, my dreams, even my love, were taken for granted. I started questioning myself quietly. Was I expecting too much? Was my effort invisible because it wasn't worth noticing? Or was I slowly disappearing in a life I had built with love? And yet, despite all of this, I continued. I smiled, I cooked, I nurtured, I loved, because that's what I believed marriage required. That's what I thought love looked like. Little did I know, These quiet years of sacrifice and selflessness were leading me toward a day I would never forget, the day I truly felt invisible to the man I had married. It started slowly, almost imperceptibly. At first, I brushed it off as tiredness, or stress, or just the way life changes when years pass. But little things began to build, and I felt the distance growing between us. Conversations that once flowed now felt short and sharp. Smiles that once felt warm now felt polite, almost rehearsed. He began coming home later and later, and I would wait, quietly cooking dinner or folding laundry, hoping for a moment together. Sometimes he would glance at me, distracted by his phone or work emails, and I would catch myself holding back a sigh. Is it so much to ask for a few minutes of attention? I thought, but I didn't say anything. Not yet. The children needed us, of course, but even they noticed the quiet tension. One evening, my daughter asked, "Mom, did Daddy forget something?" I froze, unsure what she meant. She pointed to her father, who was sitting on the couch, scrolling on his phone while dinner cooled on the table. I forced a smile. "No, sweetheart, Daddy's just tired," I said, but inside, my heart ached. It wasn't just small moments like that. I started noticing the comments, the little dismissals. "Why do you always make such a fuss about nothing?" he said one night when I gently reminded him about a bill due the next day. Another time, he laughed when I proudly showed him a cake I had baked for our son's school event. "It's fine. Don't worry so much," he said, waving his hand as if my effort meant nothing. Each of these moments left tiny bruises on my heart. I began doubting myself, asking if I had changed, if I had become too serious, too demanding, too much. But deep down, I knew the truth. I was giving everything, my love, my time, my energy, and he wasn't noticing. He wasn't seeing me, and it hurt more than I could ever put into words. I tried to talk gently, cautiously. "I just wish you would see how much I do," I said once, hesitantly. He shrugged. "I see you. You're always here." His words were meant to comfort, but they felt hollow, empty, almost dismissive. I wanted to scream, but I only nodded and smiled, because yelling wouldn't help. Explaining myself again wouldn't change anything. So, the days went on. I kept doing everything quietly, smiling when he entered the room, pretending nothing was wrong. But inside, I felt a storm, building a storm of loneliness, hurt, and unspoken resentment. I began to wonder if he even remembered what it had been like when we first fell in love, when he had laughed at my silly jokes, held my hand, and told me I was enough. The cracks in our marriage were growing, and I had a quiet, sinking feeling that, unless something changed, those cracks might eventually become a canyon. I didn't know it yet, but the day I truly felt invisible, the day that changed everything, was closer than I had ever imagined. It was a rainy afternoon when it happened. The sky was gray, and the soft patter of rain against the windows filled the house with quiet tension. I had spent the morning preparing for my husband's small work celebration at home, a simple lunch, a tidy living room, a warm atmosphere. I wanted him to feel appreciated, even if he never noticed how much I did every day. When he walked in, he greeted me with a distracted smile. I smiled back, carrying the dishes to the table, hoping he would notice the effort, but he didn't. Not even a glance at the fresh flowers I had arranged. Not a word about the food I had cooked from scratch. He sat down, scrolling on his phone, and muttered, "Looks good." That was it. I felt a tightness in my chest, the kind that makes your heart ache in silence. I wanted to tell him, "Do you even see me? Do you know how much I do? How much I care?" But the words caught in my throat. I had tried before, many times, and each time it ended in disappointment. Then he said it, the words that made everything crystallize. "Why do you always make such a big deal out of nothing? I don't need all this." I froze. I looked at him, hoping he was joking, hoping he didn't mean it. But he did. His eyes were not angry, not frustrated, just indifferent. And in that moment, something inside me cracked. Years of quiet sacrifice, of love given without acknowledgement, of nights spent worrying, of dreams set aside, it all felt invisible. I walked to the window, staring at the rain. I could feel tears forming, but I refused to let them fall in front of him. I realized then that it wasn't just about that day, or that lunch, or even the flowers. It was every day, every moment, every little thing I had done that went unnoticed, unappreciated, unseen. And the hardest part, I still loved him. I still wanted him to see me, to notice me, to care. But I had to face the truth. Love alone wasn't enough if it wasn't reciprocated. If my existence felt invisible to the person who should have cherished it most. I remember standing there, quiet, feeling the weight of all those years pressing down. The house was silent except for the rain. And I understood something vital. I had been living in a world where my presence didn't matter, where my sacrifices were invisible, where my love was taken for granted. It was a turning point, not because I yelled, or cried, or stormed out, but because I truly saw it. I saw myself through the lens of his indifference, and for the first time, I felt the magnitude of my own loneliness. And yet, in that quiet realization, there was also clarity. I could no longer ignore how unseen I had been. I could no longer pretend that being invisible was acceptable. That day, I felt a pain I had never felt before, but I also felt the first stirrings of understanding that my worth was not defined by his recognition, and that my life, my love, and my sacrifices mattered, even if he failed to see them. After that day, the house felt different. It wasn't the rain or the quiet that changed, it was me. I began to notice the small ways I had lost myself over the years, giving everything to a family that didn't seem to notice. For so long, I had measured my worth by how much I did for others, by how smooth the household ran, by how happy my husband appeared. But now, I realized that my own happiness, my own presence, mattered too. I started taking small steps, quiet ones at first. I allowed myself to sit in the living room with a book I had been too busy to read. I brewed a cup of tea and just listened to the rain, without thinking of chores or schedules. I began to speak up gently when something mattered to me, not with anger, but with calm honesty. "I need you to listen to me," I said once, and he looked at me with surprise, maybe even confusion. But I felt a small spark of strength inside me, one I hadn't felt in years. I didn't know if he would change. I didn't know if he would suddenly see all the sacrifices I had made, and part of me realized that I couldn't wait for that. My worth, my feelings, my life, these were mine, not his to validate. I began to write again, quietly, putting my thoughts on paper, capturing the emotions I had hidden for so long. It became a kind of release, a way to acknowledge that I mattered. That at first, he barely noticed these small shifts. He still left the dishes for me, still assumed I would manage everything, but something inside me had shifted, and that quiet shift changed everything. I no longer measured my days by his acknowledgement. I measured them by my own presence, my own choices, my own love for life. And slowly, things began to change in ways I didn't expect. Our children started noticing my calm confidence. They would ask me for advice, for help with more than homework, but also for stories, for moments just with me. And I realized that even if my husband didn't see me fully yet, my life had meaning beyond his recognition. It wasn't a dramatic confrontation or a big scene. It was quiet, steady, and gentle. I found myself again, in the silence that had once been so heavy with pain. I discovered that being visible to myself was more important than being seen by anyone else, and that realization brought a kind of peace I hadn't known in years. The journey wasn't over. There would still be moments of hurt, moments of feeling overlooked, but I had learned something essential. My sacrifices, my love, my presence, they mattered, whether anyone acknowledged them or not. And in that understanding, I found a quiet strength, a calm resilience, and the beginning of hope for a life that honored me as much as I had honored others. Now, when I think back to that day, the day I felt invisible, I realize it was never really about him, or even about the little things he ignored. It was about me, about how I had allowed myself to be quiet, to fade into the background, to give and give without ever pausing to honor my own heart. I began to understand that being seen isn't always about others noticing. Sometimes, it's about seeing yourself, acknowledging your own efforts, your own struggles, your own love. I had spent so many years seeking recognition from the person I loved most, and in the process, I had forgotten to recognize myself. That realization changed everything. I started to pay attention to myself in small ways. I allowed myself to rest without guilt. I embraced my own achievements, however small. I smiled at the reflection in the mirror, even when no one else seemed to notice. And in that quiet attention to myself, I discovered a new kind of happiness, a steady, calm happiness that didn't depend on anyone else's approval. Our relationship didn't transform overnight. He didn't suddenly see everything I had done, or start praising every effort I made, but something shifted between us. I spoke more openly about my feelings, not in anger, but in honesty. I shared the quiet moments of my day, my joys, my concerns, my thoughts, and slowly, he began to listen. Slowly, he began to notice the things I had always done without asking for acknowledgement. It wasn't about proving anything to him. It was about living fully as myself, giving love and care, without losing sight of my own needs. And as I embraced that truth, I felt lighter, freer, more present. I began to enjoy the little moments again, the laughter of our children, the warmth of a shared meal, the comfort of a quiet evening together. I also learned another important lesson. Love alone is not enough if it comes at the cost of invisibility. Sacrifice is meaningful only when it's balanced with support. I realized that my efforts were never invisible. They mattered to the life I built, to the home I nurtured, to the people I loved. I just needed to remember that they mattered to me first. Now, I carry that understanding with me every day. I am still a wife, a mother, a partner, but I am also fully myself. I am seen by the most important person, me. And in that recognition, I find peace, quiet, strength, and the hope that comes from honoring who I am, even when the world, or the people closest to me, don't always see it immediately. Sometimes, being invisible is painful, but it can also be the moment when you finally learn to truly see yourself, and that is a gift worth every tear, every quiet struggle, and every day you once felt unnoticed. After I began seeing myself, I noticed subtle changes in our family life. It wasn't dramatic, but there was a shift in the atmosphere, a gentle easing of the tension that had been there for years. I had stopped waiting for recognition from my husband and started living fully in each moment. And strangely, that quiet confidence began to ripple through our home. I found myself connecting more deeply with our children. I no longer felt invisible in their eyes, and they seemed to sense it. I listened to their stories with patience, laughed at their jokes, and shared small lessons about life in calm, simple ways. One afternoon, my daughter came to me with a drawing she had made. She held it shyly and said, "I made this for you, Mom, because you always helped me." I hugged her tightly, tears welling up. "Thank you, sweetheart," I whispered. That small acknowledgement, coming from her innocent heart, reminded me that even if my husband didn't always notice, my love and efforts mattered profoundly in other ways. I realized that my presence was shaping them, giving them warmth, care, and a sense of stability that couldn't be measured by words alone. With my husband, the changes were slower, but noticeable. I no longer approached him with silent frustration or unspoken resentment. Instead, I spoke calmly, honestly, about how I felt, about what I needed, and about the ways I wanted to share our lives together. One evening, I said, "I need you to notice me, not just what I do, but me. I want to feel like we are partners." He paused, looked at me for a long moment, and nodded. I haven't realized," he said softly, and that small admission, so simple, yet so sincere, felt like the first crack in the wall between us. It wasn't a dramatic apology, but it was acknowledgement, and acknowledgement was the first step toward change. I began to notice him, noticing the small glances, the quiet thanks for dinner, the way he asked about my day and actually listened. I saw glimpses of the man I had married, buried under years of routine and distraction, and I felt hope. Hope that even in ordinary days, even in quiet moments, our love could be rekindled, not because I demanded it, but because I had reclaimed my presence and allowed space for it to grow. I also learned to forgive, not to excuse past neglect, but to release the weight I had carried alone for so long. Holding on to hurt had only made me smaller. Letting go, and seeing myself clearly, gave me freedom. I could still love him, still be present with him, without losing myself in the process. Life didn't become perfect overnight. There were still moments of tension, still days when I felt unseen, but now I had the tools, the calm strength, and the clarity to navigate them. I had learned that being visible starts from within, and when I was truly present in myself, others could begin to see me too. Now, when I look back, I understand that the day I felt invisible was also the day I began to truly see myself. It was painful, yes, but it was also necessary. For years, I had measured my worth by what others noticed, especially my husband. I had given my love, my energy, my time, without ever pausing to honor my own heart. That silence, that invisibility, taught me a lesson I will carry for the rest of my life. Being seen begins within. I still love him. I still share our life, our children, and our home. But the difference now is quiet but profound. I no longer depend on him to validate my presence. I am present for myself first. I notice the little things I accomplish. I celebrate small joys, and I allow myself moments of rest and reflection without guilt, and that calm attention to my own life has made all the difference. There are mornings when he pauses to smile at me as I prepare breakfast. There are evenings when he asks how I spent my day and genuinely listens. He still forgets things sometimes, and I still feel the sting of being overlooked. But the difference is that I no longer feel defined by his attention. I am seen by myself, and that makes all the quiet moments, the struggles, and the sacrifices meaningful in ways they never were before. I have also learned that love is not just about giving endlessly. Love is about presence, about acknowledgement, about balance. I realized that my sacrifices mattered not because he recognized them, but because they shaped my life, my home, and the people I cared about. And when I honor my own contributions, my own heart, I find that others begin to notice naturally, without demand or expectation. The children see me now as both mother and person. They see my efforts, my calm strength, my choices, and even my husband has begun to notice small things he once overlooked. I no longer wait for recognition, but when it comes, it feels like a gift rather than a necessity. Sometimes, in the quiet evenings, I sit by the window, listening to the soft hum of life around me. I think about that day I felt invisible, and I smile softly. It was a painful day, yes, but it led me to understanding, to clarity, and to strength. I learned that being visible is not about demanding attention, but about honoring yourself first. That lesson has changed everything. Life is not perfect. There are still moments of quiet frustration, still days when my heart aches a little, but I have learned to carry those moments with grace. I have learned to see myself, and in seeing myself, I have found peace, resilience, and hope. And that is a gift I will never take for granted, because sometimes, the hardest moments teach us the most important lessons, and being invisible can become the beginning of truly being seen.